What's up, everyone, and welcome back to Star Wars Explained. We're continuing our deep dive look at the High Republic, and today we're going to be discussing it with Daniel Jose Older, author of The Last Shot and now the newly released High Republic Adventures and the upcoming middle grade book, Race to Crash Point Tower. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk about all things Star Wars, and we'll obviously have a focus on the High Republic.
It's my pleasure. I love this show. I'm very happy to be here. I always learn a lot when I watch the show, so it's great. Thanks.
Well, thank you. That means the world to us. Well, I have a little icebreaker question that I like to ask people. Just what is your favorite, or who is your favorite minor Star Wars character? Who's a character that's like a C or D list that you think you might actually be the biggest fan of?
Oh, that's such a good question. I feel like I walk around with like lists of them, and then when someone asks, I forget all those things. But I mean, I guess I'm just in like a Galaxy's Edge state of mind because I keep thinking about Dok-Ondar.
Nice, yeah, that's a good one.
But then and Hondo both are just like right there. I'm just thinking about Hondo and like all the adventures he's taken us on. But yeah, I'll go with those for now. But it changes time.
I think those are great answers. Usually people will go, I mean, mine is always Biggs Darklighter. Usually people will pick a background character from the movies. I don't think I've had someone say someone from a TV show, or like Dok-Ondar is a very unique choice.
He's like, that place is so special, you know, and I just love, like, man, we could go off. Let me not. I love that place. We all do.
Yeah. Kind of along those same lines, you recently wrote for 4-LOM and Zuckuss, and from a certain point of view, The Empire Strikes Back. What was it about them specifically that you made you want to write for them, and what inspired what I think is probably the most uniquely told story in that book?
Thank you. That wasn't my goal, by the way, but it did work out very strangely. I really love the underworld in Star Wars everywhere, but you know, like The Godfather is definitely my favorite movie, my favorite non-Star Wars movie. And the whole, just, you know, the Jabba's palace scene is kind of my foundational like moment of Star Wars love, and from there on out. So the underworld has always been really important to me as a Star Wars fan, and I got to touch on it in Last Shot, obviously. But even just writing those, like, I just wanted to do more. Like, I love that world so much. It's so complicated and interesting, and like there's all kinds of interesting like moral ambiguity that comes to it, and then it's just really fun, and it can be really funny, and it just has everything great about Star Wars. And this just seemed like such a great opportunity to do that. And I thought the bounty hunters were going to be like taken immediately when they, you know, by the time I got to the project or whatever, but they were still there, and I was like, oh, perfect. And then I love diner stories. So I wanted to, and I already had free ragos from Last Shot. So I was like, oh, let me just put some gangsters in a diner, and that's my happy place, you know what I mean? And then somehow I was trying to write the story, and it wasn't coming out right, no matter what. And I had initially had this plan to do this weird, mind-boggling idea where it was like a puff piece gone wrong, editorial notes, and that was kind of from the jump. That was the idea. And then I was like, no, that's such a like thing, like it's such a gimmick. And so I put it away, and then I couldn't write the piece, and then I was like, well, let me go back to kind of. Yeah,
I thought it was a really fun gimmick. So yeah,
I think gimmicks can work, but you have to make sure you commit to it like all the way and make it make sense in the story, and that was my goal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you're writing in like from a certain point of view, I think the point is to get all of these different, such a variety of stories, and
that's what's fun about it. Yeah, it's a variety of stories, variety of voices, and it is really a good opportunity to experiment and be playful.
Yeah. So up until this point, I would say that like your Star Wars stories have had a lot of context surrounding them, whether it's Last Shot, you're writing for characters who are known. So now that we're in the High Republic, what would you say is the biggest advantage, and what's the biggest challenge that you see writing where like this is all your own creation?
Right. I think of it as kind of, it's both. Like it's that exact thing is both the challenge, and the great part about it is that we get to really introduce this whole new world, and there's a lot of parts of that we get to put into motion and you know, put our heads together about and come up with fresh. And then that is also like, yes, there's the challenge of any fantasy writer is like introducing people to a new world, and that's hard, right? Like you got to establish certain things, in some ways it's easier because it's an era of a world that so many people already know, and so there's those certain touchstones, like Yoda, and that gives us a sense of like, okay, we know Yoda, so now we're going to build around that. But also, how is Yoda different now, right? So it's a constant conversation and a constant balance between feeling fresh and new and doing stuff that feels very Star Wars.
Mhm.
Which in some ways is like always the challenge of Star Wars, right? Like whatever era you're writing in, you're trying to do something that feels fresh and something that feels Star Wars. And those are not in, they don't have to cancel each other out at all, but they require thought into making sure you get that balance right.
Yeah. Well, since you bring it up, what is it like to write Yoda at this point in time? Like it is, yes, this anchor of familiarity, but also just how is he different, like as a young, spry 700-year-old
Right.
master?
I think of him as a little bit more audacious and out in the world. He's not, he's not as tethered to any one place. He's out with the kids. Like, I think he's a little more ready to just like fly into situations and see what happens. He's still the wise Jedi Master that we know from the later years, but he is much more an adventure man out and about. And yes, he's also like a chaperone, but he's the chaperone that like you could probably like sneak out at night and he would be sneaking out with you to have a good time. Like the whole crew ends up running around the streets of Coruscant or whatever, like learning weird lessons. But he's like keeping an eye on everything, not breaking any boundaries, just kind of like watching, making sure things go well, also having a really good time and, enjoying his life.
Interesting. So he's a teacher still, but he's not so much the like, ooh, we better meditate on this for a while before we make any rash decision. Interesting.
He makes moves. He's a move maker.
Yeah.
We see him, in combat, which is exciting. That might be a spoiler. I'm not even. But yeah, I mean, he's out fighting the fight. Like when things happen, he's in the front, and that's really fun to write.
Well, what was it about this era specifically? This 200 years before the prequels. What was it that excited you personally about it?
For me, it's so many things. I think it is kind of what we were talking about initially, which is like that it's exactly the right amount of time away from things where it does feel really different. Like it like this. I feel like the High Republic has already like established itself as like a different era, and when you're in the High Republic like almost immediately because of, and a lot of this is just the genius of the graphic work that the Lucasfilm and Disney folks have done, and just the aesthetic of it all. And then our job as the writers is to establish that in whatever way we can. So I love being able to write Jedi that aren't doomed immediately, and like being able to like be playful with them and like imagine them having potentially long lives and satisfying, lives or whatever. And that really does change a lot in terms of how you're telling stories. And we still get to have those Yoda characters. There's a lot of long-lived, potentially long-lived characters that could pop up. Who knows? But it still feels like Star Wars, right? Like that's what's fun. Like there's the settings, if you think about a city, how it changes in the course of several hundred years, it's a lot, but there's still certain things about it that feel the same. And it's kind of cool to think like what's the same and what's different. And yeah, to me, it's just the right amount of time of familiarity and excitement.
Great. When you were developing it, this whiteboard has become kind of infamous where like you were just writing kind of what is important to each of you about Star Wars, and people really honed in on dinosaurs, and I believe you got credit for that. I have to ask, who or what is your favorite Star Wars dinosaur?
Well, first of all, let me correct the record. I don't think I actually was the one that wrote dinosaurs. At the time, I was writing Dactyl Hill, the series, Dactyl Hill Squad, which is a middle grade series about kids who ride dinosaurs during the Civil War. And so I was and remain obsessed with dinosaurs. And it had probably come up by that time like a number of times. And I think someone wrote it on my behalf as a
gotcha.
joke. So, but I mean, let's be honest, like Star Wars has literally had dinosaurs from like the first 15 minutes of the first movie. You know what I mean? Like dewbacks are my favorite Star Wars dinosaur for sure. That's why my first ever Star Wars story, and from a certain point of view, volume 1 is about a guy obsessed with dewbacks, aka me. Like they're the best.
So a little more seriously, what besides dinosaurs is important to you when you're telling the Star Wars story?
It is that balance that I keep coming back to. I love that it kind of almost has like a poetic connection to the idea of balancing the Force. Like I was talking about balancing the Force and what does that really mean? And I feel like we still don't really know what that means, right? We've had glimpses of it, but ultimately that's an open question, I think, in a lot of ways. And I think that's true of Star Wars as a writer. Like, how do you balance like both feeling very Star Warsy, and then within that, to me, what defines Star Wars is like this particular kind of balance between lightheartedness, but like it does take itself very seriously in the best way, right? Like the joking stuff never gets in the way or pulls you out of the story. It's all very in-story jokiness, and that's that particular brand of humor. And of course, it moves within that range a lot, right? Like the stuff that skews younger has a certain kind of humor, and the stuff that skews older different. Like there's a lot of range in there, but it still falls within certain boundaries that make it feel very Star Wars. So I'm always trying to think within that range and like make sure that I'm aware when I start to go out of that range. I think another challenge is like the balance, and this is true in all fantasy, but again, Star Wars has its particular version of this. It's like the balance of like familiarity, not in terms of like Star Wars familiarity, but familiarity with stuff that we understand as humans who inhabit this earth. And we see things in Star Wars and we're like, that was so real. Like, I know that moment, like when a person shrugs in that particular way, or whatever those small nuances of humanity are that just feel really vivid. Or like the feeling of walking into like a dark bar. And maybe it's exciting or maybe it's scary or whatever, but that's something we can connect to. At the same time, we don't want to go over the limit and be like, oh, that's so Earth. Like, that's so like, I literally was there the other day. And and it just pulls you right out of the story, right? And I think we all have our different kind of touchstone moments where we felt like they like skewed a little too far in one direction or the other. And that's kind of very personal. But at the same time, like I know what I love about Star Wars, and finding that balance is really, that's the challenge of writing it, but that's kind of the exciting part too. And that's what I'm always striving for. Same idea with like when you're writing a character that's known, like when you're writing a Han or a Lando, it's almost not easier, but it's a different challenge because it's like, can you hear the voice of the actor saying those words? And you have that touchstone. So if I can hear it, if I can hear William December Williams say those words, then I know, like, this is a Lando line. This could work. And there it is.
I remember reading Last Shot, and like I'm reading and I'm writing notes for my own like reviews down the line, and I remember writing down like, this just feels like Han and Lando bantering at each other. So I thought you nailed that.
I would literally be like doing it like while I was writing. I'd be like, and here you are, a 5. My wife is over there like, sir.
Sir, this is a Chili's.
Right.
So in the High Republic, we're seeing the Jedi and the Republic at their height right now.
Yeah.
What's important for you to show how they are both different and how they are in a better place at this point in time?
Right. That's what's been so interesting about this. It's like, first of all, Star Wars is really good at taking complex politics and turning it into something still complex, but also exciting, right? Like trade tariffs, right? Like how do you make sci-fi adventure about like trade wars and everything and blockades? And like, they do it really, really well. They always have. That's always been in the fabric of Star Wars. So with that context, like thinking about this as a project that looks at how good governing could actually happen is really interesting. As long as we do it in the context of a fun space adventure where people are shooting blasters at each other, right? Like it's not a political, propaganda piece. It's got to be like something that thinks complexly about the world and something that asks these hard questions. We've mostly seen Star Wars look at this question of chaos and order in a balance that has the Empire as being obsessed with chaos to the point of willing to, destroy entire planets, obsessed with order to the point of willing to destroy entire planets and calling, anyone against them chaotic and forces of chaos or whatever. And the rebels are like, we're just trying to like get equality for people, right? We're fighting for freedom. And then the rebels win, and then we have the New Republic, spoiler, and it's a mess, and like it does last for a good a while, but there's a lot of things wrong with it, including that they don't take the Order, who are now the Chaos Agents, seriously enough. And here's an opportunity to kind of like clear the whole slate, because it's before all of that, and wonder like, what did things look like when we had people in power who cared about freedom and liberty and equality, and also cared about keeping things in some kind of order in order to maintain that freedom? And like, how does that look? Like, what does good government look like? And again, how do we tell a good story with like lightsabers in the midst of that? And that's what we're asking. And I think it's a really particular moment in history to be asking that question, right?
Yeah,
And
I agree completely.
yeah, a global pandemic and the aftermath of everything that has been and all that tragedy, and like try to pick ourselves up. Like those are exactly the questions we need to be asking. And like, what do we do with chaos agents in the midst of that? And how do we, find freedom when we're trying to also like lift up each other? These are hard questions, but they're great questions for Star Wars to be asking. They're the questions that Star Wars has always asked.
And when you're dealing with such like complex stuff like that, how challenging is it, and how do you make it accessible for like the Star Wars Adventures line is for a younger audience in
Right.
general? So like how do you, I think you did it, but how do you communicate those ideas to a younger audience?
That's such a great question. It's something that's really in the forefront of my mind because I think it's really about the question is always like the how, right? The strategy of it, and not the whether, because the whether again is always there. Star Wars is implicitly always has been political, and in the best way. I think that's why we love it. Someone, I can't remember if it's Twitter or TikTok, but someone was like, if you take the politics out of Star Wars, it's just Star. That cracks me up to this day. I think that's hysterical because it's true. Wars are all political. There's no such thing as a non-political war. But anyway, I've always asked that question in my work, even before Star Wars, and still in my non-Star Wars work. It's a fascinating question, and people have always asked me that because my work always has complex world building. I think that's one of the things I just love to do. And to me, it isn't that. It's the idea of world building. I think of it. This is from my years as a musician, but I think of it as harmony versus story being melody. So if you will come with me on this journey for a sec while I make that analogy make sense. Story in some ways, in a very simple way, it is a straight line. Even if we jump around with chronological and we're playful chronologies and all that, you're still going from point A to point B. And at the end, you've kind of gotten somewhere and you can look back on that straight line. But I think of world building and context and setting and place and time. That is more like harmony, right? Harmony is like stacked notes on top of each other, chords that change throughout a piece because place changes. Because, if we're doing our job building worlds, they're dynamic and they're always in motion. Like as Yoda says, the future is, right? They're in crisis. There's all kinds of things happening and they're sort of in the background, but then they jump into the foreground in certain moments that are like major moments in galactic or world history, whatever they may be. And I think if we think of like, if we take all those complex conversations that we're having, and we do need to have them, about how the Republic is functioning, how did the Jedi fit within it all, how did the divisions within the Jedi or within the Republic play out, and we put those in this idea of harmony, of things that are always happening, and in different moments they kind of jump into the foreground and take a front seat, and in other moments they're just a constant movement in the background while the solo is happening, while the melody goes. That allows us to have these really complicated conversations without letting them get in the way of the ultimate goal, which is still telling a great story with lightsabers and
yeah.
I
No, it does. It does. And I kind of want to build off a little bit more just because I was really impressed with some of those themes that you got into just the very first issue of the High Republic Adventures. So like what messages are important to you when you're writing a Star Wars story for fans at this age?
Oh yeah,
I have some ideas based off of what
I don't want to hear your ideas.
Okay, so I mean, Zine specifically, I really loved her character. I've seen a lot of love for Zine, and she's someone that has this power. She has the Force, but has been told that she's wrong to have it and shouldn't use it. But in the first issue, she overcomes her fear of herself to save lives, save her friends and the people around her. So yeah, that's something that obviously someone in middle school can relate to, that like if you're afraid to be yourself and be who you really are. I thought that was so well executed in that first issue. So I assume that that there are other things like that are important to you.
Thank you. That's it. That's not it, but that's definitely the biggest one that for that half of the story. Of course, that's really what I wanted to talk about, and I keep realizing that that's such a major theme throughout a lot of my work, is like, especially for young people, is the idea of coming into your own, around your own power, and how hard that can be. And I think it can be very obvious and dramatic in certain ways, like people telling you that you shouldn't be powerful and like you shouldn't use the Force. That's a really clear example of it. I think there's micro and tiny ways that we do it to each other, and sort of hold each other back without wanting to or meaning to, sometimes thinking we're doing it out of love. And I just think all those conversations are ones we need to have, especially for young people, so that they can have the room to look at themselves outside of the context of that, whatever that world is that's telling them they don't need to be powerful, that their own power is bad. And really like, and that's the moment I think that's most important in that whole issue is like when Zine sees the Jedi being the Jedi, I always come back to it in my mind because it's just so amazing when people find a community or a family, a found family, or even just people to look up to. And they're totally outside of what they may even be the people that they thought were supposed to be the bad guys. And suddenly they're like, whoa, like they're out there with their lightsabers, like saving people's lives. And they have something in common with me and how special that feels. You know, like I remember finding my community of writers, you know, and I was never told not to write. I grew up in a very supportive, creative household. But still, like the world doesn't necessarily want us to be creatives, you know, like that's not necessarily the way to go. Or we all have to kind of go on our journey, even those of us who grew up supported in our creativity, to get to a place where we're like, this is my power, this is what I need to do with my life. Even if it means getting a horrible day job or a great day job, like I had being a paramedic, you know, there's layers to this. So, but finding like writers that I understood and I felt like implicitly were speaking my language and were telling stories that I thought were so powerful and still so exciting and all that stuff. It's like you found this home around you and how powerful that can be. And I just wanted to capture that, you know, and shout out to Harvey Tolibao, because his line work and just the way that he caught her expression of just awe, you know, and seeing those Jedi, it's just like, it gives me chills still.
Not only that, just her seeing, there's so many just shots. Is that or frames? I'm not as good at talking about comics as panels. Yes, that panel of her just like looking down on her as she's holding it up.
And
the panel of her and Lula working together, or like the split faces. There's so much great stuff in this. Like the Star Wars Adventures line in the past for me is like, I mean, I enjoy them, but they're not for me, and that's fine. Right. But this was like an adventures comic where I was like, this is like just it's good. it's a good Star Wars comic, and like,
thank you.
It's one of the first times I felt really, really excited about the Adventures line.
That's great. I think I love those too. I love like the stuff they've been doing, and I think one of the differences, to the credit of this initiative, they were like, and I was always an advocate of this, and I didn't have to do any work to get there because Sig Lane and everybody were on board with it. But the idea here is really to tell an epic saga with this story, with this line, with this particular line, not just the High Republic, obviously that too. That's a huge epic saga, right? But these characters, like we follow them throughout the initiative. They are huge characters, and they intersect with the large events of the galaxy in major ways. You know, we follow plot points that are like gigantic moments in the initiative that there are beats that we will only see in IDW. We go deep into the upper echelons of the Nile and learn a lot about the Nile behind the scenes that we won't see in other places. And yeah, that's not the norm for Star Wars. They don't tend to let the younger readers kind of get those beats. So it's really, really exciting that we've like all just kind of come together to be like, no, you know, and the same holds for like the middle grade stuff, the YA stuff. Like there's each one really stands on its own, and each one is very interconnected to the world in the coolest of ways.
Yeah, I totally agree that stuff like Justina's A Test of Courage, I was like this got maybe the darkest of like personally for Emery. I was like, they're right. So yeah, that's really exciting to hear. And yeah, like Markian Rowe shows up at the end of the first issue, and I was like, oh, they're really like he's involved. Like the stakes just jumped up.
It's what's cool is like it's not just that, is that like I can't talk.
Don't get in trouble.
It's so hard, like because it's the hardest thing is knowing what has and what hasn't been revealed. But I'll say that as a tantalizing clue. I do want to say that like moving forward, the way that all those little moments of like interconnectivity that we've seen already in this first round that is now finished, as you know, has now like come out. Those only get heightened as we move forward. And like in particular, Cav's Del Rey book upcoming, The Rising Storm, and Crash Point Tower, Race to Crash Point Tower, my middle grade, which come out on the same day. Those are like the epicenter of interconnectivity. up to this point. Like what we'll see with those two books is like a much greater degree of like things happening on top of each other and simultaneously and chaotically and everything else. And like I'm so excited for that because we really worked hard. It was like making like two different movies simultaneously, you know, like, and just getting all these points to land and like ta and like it was just such a process, but it was so worthwhile because the result is so cool. And I think something we just haven't seen that much of, which is like truly interconnected, like but truly separate and standalone, you know, stories that are just woven into each other, like, and it's really cool.
It's so exciting to hear that the High Republic Adventures is like treated, yes, as important as everything else. Where and Vernestra Rowe showed up in Cav's comic this past week as well, and I was surprised and excited about that. So, and I know, Lula is going to be in Race to Crash Point Towers. So
Max is in that too. Actually, she pops in.
Oh, great. There's one character that you've talked about a bit, and he does appear in High Republic Adventures, but like Buckets of Blood, Torben Buck. I have to know, how did he get this nickname? Is this an in-universe nickname?
It is.
Are the Jedi cool with it?
Not really. We find that we do. He does say it in issue 2. I can say that.
Okay.
And he tries to explain it, but there's a lot going on. I'm laughing because there was different versions. It's like I don't even know what I can say. There's a version of issue 2 where like he says it and Yoda's like, "What?"
That's what Yoda's like. Don't call yourself that.
and then he, well, it's not even that Yoda like doesn't like it. It's everyone is like, "What?" And then because they don't know him that well, you know, he just shows up. I mean, he's like but nothing has happened that had required him to say that. That's up to that point. But and all the kids are like, what? He tries to explain it. There's a lot going on. And then there's another moment where they need him to do something, and he's like, oh no, Buckets of Blood doesn't, you know, like I'm a healer, you know. And Yoda's like, didn't you say your name was Buckets of Blood? And he's like, because I put the blood back in the body, you know.
Okay.
That's his whole theory behind his name. That got cut up and moved around a little, so it didn't quite end up with Yoda actually checking him on his own name and being like, didn't you say your name is Buckets of Blood, my dude? He doesn't say it like that. But anyway, that's not in the final version, so that's not canon. But we will find out more about him, and he does get to shout his famous name. I didn't quite realize like how it was going to catch on leading into things. So obviously, like the first issue has been written for months, so like. Mm-hmm. You know, people are like, wait, is he really Buckets of Blood? Yes, he is really Buckets of Blood. His name is Torben Buck. His nickname is really Buckets of Blood. It is a self-assigned nickname, and he does yell it out in issue 2.
I love the idea of, he's like trying to heal and literally running with buckets of blood, like, I'm here to help.
Yes. And he is based on a medic that I never knew personally, but was like a famous street lore basically in New York City when I was a paramedic, and everyone used to talk about Buckets of Blood, who was a healer, you know, in spite of his nickname. He was trying to do right by the world. I'm still waiting for him to email me and be like, you owe me money.
So the High Republic was your very first comic. Is that correct?
That is true.
So I mean, what?
Yeah.
What's that like to see something that not only you wrote, but like, the art that goes along with it? Just how is it different seeing a comic release than a book?
It's truly next level. First of all, just like I had a book come out this week. Flood City came out on Tuesday, and then the comic came out the next day. And I have to say, like, I'm still not, it doesn't get old. Like, I think Flood City is my 14th book, and it's still really amazing to just pick it up out of the box and see your name on it. And more than that, just see the characters you came up with in print and everything. But seeing like the art and the true like final thing of a comic, even though it's smaller, there is something even more powerful about that because it's truly collaborative. Because the thing I realized recently that it's connected to, that I hadn't put it together, but I used to, you know, write songs a lot. And I worked with this really talented guy named Aki Burmese, who's a pianist and singer, and he's just, everything he touches is gold. And I would write songs and give them to him, and then he would perform them, and like I would play bass, but like he was really bringing the song to life. And that's what it's like. I mean, writing, it feels like I'm playing bass. Like I'll just be like, you know, this thing happens, and then Harvey is like, rah, masterpiece, like, and Rebecca, like the whole team is amazing. And so just seeing them like take those stories and turn them into better stories, like make the characters deeper, and make everything just more complex and more dynamic, It's just there's nothing like it. It is the greatest writer experience. It's so cool.
How were kind of the job assignments handed out at the start of Project Luminous here? Like, were people competing to write the comics, or are you, because you and Cav are writing these ongoing series on
Mhm.
top of writing books?
Mhm.
So, like, were you trying to not take on the extra work, or were you like trying to? How did that all go down?
It was more just like what's amazing about this whole team, and I really have to shout them all out, like just how great they have been to work with. Is that it so feels very, it just doesn't feel competitive. Like we're just not, and that's true across the board with Star Wars. Like there's no one at Star Wars who is like in competition with someone else at Star Wars. That's not, look, I don't know everybody. Obviously, there's more people I don't know than I do, but I have worked with those people for a while now, and like the overall sentiment, it's like I talked about in the Disney Plus thing, and at the pitch day, like the release day event, like pitching was such a marvelous experience. And it's hard to explain, like if for people who haven't pitched, like pitching is terrifying, and for pitching to be not just like not terrifying but actually fun and inspiring in a setting as high intensity as Star Wars is actually incredible. So for them to have created an atmosphere, an environment that is so supportive that you can just literally like pitch to a room full of story executives, story group, and other people with decision making power and fellow writers, and not feel like there's like a bunch of arrows pointed at your head. That is quite remarkable. It is a very warm and family like atmosphere, and not in a fake way, and that's amazing. So that in terms of like how things went, like I think we all just kind of were like, hey, Mike was like, what do y'all want to do? And we were like, well, here's what we want to do. And he was like, all right. And then he handed out assignments, and we were all like, cool.
Cool.
Basically that. I knew I wanted to do comics in part because I hadn't done comics before. I'm a lifelong comics fan, and I felt like it was time for me to start doing that. That was really clear to me, like going into it. But I wasn't like, I have to do comics, otherwise I'm out. It's none of that. I know I'm known as a prose writer. That's what I've been doing for the past 10 years. So I expected to write some prose too. I'm thrilled to be writing prose. But the comics thing is like the special treat.
Yeah. I mean, I love that everyone kind of mixed up the expectations of when they announced the writers, and it was like, there are going to be comics and this, and I was like, well, yeah, I'd like Charles Soule is going to do the comic, and like, yeah, I loved that, and it's so far it's been so great seeing everyone tackle different things.
I love that about it too.
So yeah, we mentioned the High Republic Adventures is going to be ongoing, but yeah, the Race to Crash Point Tower is on the way. And it's going to be centered around the Republic Fair. Can you tell us anything about that event?
I don't know. I can tell you that. Can I say what planet it's on? I don't even know it's been revealed or not. I can tell you that Ram, Joe Moran, who we have met, I know he's the character that has grease stains all over his Padawan robes because he is a Jedi mechanic. He lives on the planet that the fair is happening on. And so it's kind of like this dynamic where it's like, it's not exactly small town, but it's not a big city. And, like the galaxy has never really turned all of its attention to this place. And suddenly like everybody is there, right? Like all these dignitaries and important people are showing up, and there's been plans in progress for weeks and months and everything. And it's all lots of excitement. And he's like, I really just want to be in my garage helping to make speeders work again that are broken with my Von Brax and my droid that looks like a box. And that's all I want to do. So, he's just trying to live his little like best Padawan mechanic life. What's really fun is like, because it's peacetime still, more or less, Nile notwithstanding, I think that's why we get to see so many cool, like we've been talking a lot in different settings about how the Force appears differently to people, like we haven't gotten to have so many of those conversations because we've always known Jedi at war. And like when you're at war, like all of your resources go towards fighting. And so now it's like seeing the Jedi at peace, we get to see what Jedi are like when they get to just live their regular lives and also have the Force and like be part of this order of, awesome warrior monks, but not at war. So we get to see Ram like be fascinated by mechanics and grease and the way things work and the way oil bubbles and all of that stuff. And like the Force is just a part of that for him. It's not like he has some special Force ability. He's just like, this is what I love. This is what I know. And I have the Force. Hey,
Huh. I really like that. And I'm so glad you brought Ram up, because my very next question was about him. I want to know what the inspiration for, this Jedi that just wants to be in his garage is, because it feels like an anti-Luke Skywalker, where he basically wants Luke's life on Tatooine.
Oh my God.
He has the life of adventure, but he wants what Luke wants. And Luke is the flip. He's stuck in a garage on a farm, and he wants adventure. He wants to be a Jedi.
I love that. I did not think about that at all. He also, Ram has a yellow lightsaber, which, the current Marvel Luke has. I love that Charles did that. That's so interesting. I love that. When I was coming up with him, it was also about the pomp and circumstance piece. Like he and I both are not really about pomp and circumstance. Like he doesn't like standing there for hours on end while people march past and do regalia and all the other stuff. And like, yeah, it's kind of a off the beaten path community, but it's still just like stuff that he has to do. He doesn't feel like peopling. I do enjoy peopling up to a point, but but when that point comes, I'm done, and I just want to be in my little workshop doing my little thing and fiddling with stuff. So even though I'm not a very good mechanic, I do enjoy taking stuff apart. I'm just not good at putting it back together. Yeah.
Well, I also I really loved seeing you did an interview with. By the time this comes out, it will have been last week with our friends Broaxium, and they're so great. And I really loved seeing a tweet from Chris Ryans, who said that you created a character in Ram that he felt like. I was like, I'm finally seeing me in Star Wars. So
yeah, that's so sweet. I love that.
How does that feel to see people already falling in love with Ram? After just barely meeting him,
right? Like literally concept art, like and the cover, like it's amazing. That's what's really been poignant in my whole experience of Star Wars is things like that happening. Whether it is before, like because it happened with Lula too, and Zine and talking about her circumstance and different like on TikTok and stuff, and people being like, "Oh yeah, I know that feeling," and just already being like, "She's already my favorite." And I love that. I love that about Star Wars fans, like that they. Just because I'm that way too. I'll see art of something, and it'll just jump out at me as alive, and I will make up a whole story. And so I totally get it. Like I just do the same thing. So I don't know. It's the greatest thing. And yeah, like he hadn't seen himself, and so like to have that moment be something I was a part of, that's really just like a big piece of like what I'm here to do, and I'm just really happy. It's so fulfilling. Because I've had that moment too. I've been like, where am I in this story? And then like there's Jimmy Smits or whatever. And I'm like, hey, like those moments are so meaningful. They're such turning points. I don't know if Jimmy Smits was like necessarily the touchstone, but I mean, I love that guy, and that's an example. But whatever. The point is like, it's just like, I'm in my head. I'm just like, what other Latinx folks did I see before him? He might have been the first. Either way, it's just it's those things matter. They matter to people, and it's an incredible experience, and I just love being a part of that.
Yeah, they do matter, and I really appreciate that you've put them into your stories for people to see themselves, and you've definitely even educated someone like me who, I've always been able to see myself in Star Wars. Like I'm not hurting, so like I see you write some stories like Taka. Taka was a character that helped educate someone like me. And so I also appreciate that side of it.
Thank you. I learned a lot writing Taka. There's a lot I don't know, as a cis person. And definitely one thing, the idea of like being able to gender yourself instead of be gendered by someone outside. And that was something I also learned kind of writing trans folks in other books too. And my inclination was to like have someone. It just wasn't even something I thought that deeply about because that's cis privilege, is not thinking about how you come across gender-wise. But it was really important to have Taka be able to identify themselves, and that's why they have that. What is that? It's like a little data pad, and Lando reads it, and it's like Taka Tamarisa. They need no introduction, and it's like such a small thing, and it gave me a chance to just let them present who they are, and then also like have Han and Lando not miss a beat. Really important, and to me that moment really warmed my heart because I love it when like I was at a thing the other day and there were some elders, like older poet folks in the room and in a virtual room, and one of the guys introduced him. He was like this in his 70s, like this old Puerto Rican guy, and he introduced himself and said his pronouns. And I was like, man, like it's just so dope. Like, and a cis dude, you know, but he just said his pronouns, and like it's such a small thing that isn't a small thing at all, and really does matter. But it's really cool to see folks respecting that, and then to see young folks respecting it is really dope too. So I just want people to feel at home in Star Wars, you know, and like especially people that haven't had that opportunity to. I think that's really, really important. And I think that's the responsibility of the artist. Like, if we're honest about how much stories matter, and we all know there's not a single person who loves Star Wars that doesn't know how powerful stories can be, then we have to understand the powerful responsibility that it's involved with telling them.
Yeah, I love that. Well, we've been going for longer than I think I was supposed to keep you, so we'll try to wrap some things up.
Man, I enjoy talking to you.
I'm having a great time, but I'll ask a question I'm sure you cannot answer. But what else is in store for you as we continue with the High Republic? Beyond Race to Crashpoint, do you have more stories to tell?
I can say that I do have more stories to tell.
Okay, good.
There are definitely, a bunch of there's a bunch of High Republic adventure issues on the way in the works that I get to look at and just snicker about how much chaos it's going to cause, and story chaos and everything else. It's that saga. I got to tell you, I'm just having so much fun with it, and like seeing where it's going and what's in store for these characters and all the twists and turns along the way, and then getting to see the art of it. So there's so much ahead, and about the phases, so there's a lot.
Yeah. Are you going to keep venturing into maybe young adult novels? Are you going to keep mixing it up, or who knows?
Who knows?
Well, the High Republic Adventures issue 1 is out right now. Race to Crashpoint Towers coming out June 29th. Where can people follow you online, and maybe what non-Star Wars stories that you've written would you recommend for Star Wars fans to check out?
Oh, thank you.
Just to expand our own horizons.
I did not tell them to make this kid look like John Boyega, but they did. It's hilarious. This is Flood City. It's my most recent book, although I wrote it 10 years ago, randomly, because publishing is weird. And it just came out on Tuesday. It's a middle grade. It is very Star Wars influenced. It's kids in the last city on Earth after floods have taken over, fighting off these evil chemical barons who caused the floods, who are trying to retake the city. And there's lots of definitely like just flying around on jet boots and weird monsters and aliens and stuff like that. So a Star Wars fan will definitely enjoy that. Shadow Shaper is right behind me. That's my young adult series that is now completed, about kids in Brooklyn putting spirits into murals and different artwork to fight off bad guys. What was I gonna say? Oh, my socials at DJ Older on Twitter. My only G-rated social is TikTok. It's Daniel Jose Older is my TikTok. I'm really committed to keeping that a kid safe space, so I'm not swearing on there, which, as you probably know since you follow me on Twitter, is actually a feat. But yeah, most active there. I'm also on Instagram at Daniel Jose 1, and that's it. That's it.
Perfect.
Like I have a class up on Skillshare about storytelling fundamentals. So if you're interested in that and you want to be a writer, it's been very successful for a lot of people, and they've really enjoyed it. So yeah, Skillshare is a really cool platform where people do online classes and stuff like that.
Awesome. Well, I'll link to all that in the description.
Great.
Thank you so much again for taking some time out to talk about Star Wars. I love your stuff. I love following you on Twitter. You are a very fun follow.
Thank you. Listen, it's been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this, and I'm excited to come back. We got more to talk about up ahead.
I would love to. Maybe June 29th or around there.
Yes, indeed. Wow.
Well, thanks again. Thank you all so much for watching and hanging out. May the Force be with you.